to wait just a couple of more minutes until everybody joins. For now, those that joined, thank you for joining. Just a couple of more minutes and then we will begin this session. My name is Vladimir Chuk and I'm Executive Director of the International Disability Alliance. I guess it's safe that we can begin now. So once again, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Vladimir Chuk. I'm Executive Director of the International Disability Alliance. And we have a very important workshop webinar today where we are going to discuss about a discussion paper on OPD engagement of organizations of persons with disabilities. And this discussion paper is meant to frame the conversation at the Global Disability Summit, but also to go beyond that to inspire commitments of those stakeholders that will come to the Global Disability Summit. Unfortunately, as you know, this summit will be virtual, so they will come virtually to the summit, and they will hopefully commit very interesting developments from their organizations. Besides that, we want to seek your support. So we don't want to develop this position paper only from IDA. By the way, IDA was tasked from the co-host of the summit to produce this discussion paper. So we don't want to develop this alone. We need all the help that we can get. So we need help from many organizations of persons with disabilities, from many mainstream organizations, from many NGOs, from UN system, from donors, foundations, pretty much from all stakeholders that are contributing to the engagement of organizations of persons with disabilities, whether at the national level, whether at the disability inclusive development and humanitarian action, etc. So quite important session for us, and I believe for you since you are joining it. Finally, we are hoping that during today's session to gather initial feedback on provisional outline for this discussion paper. We are going to review also process. We are going to propose a process how we would jointly develop this discussion paper. And finally, to seek your opinion if we are simply missing something at this stage. It's important that if you see that we are doing something completely wrong, that you speak now, because it is just beginning initial stage of brainstorming. So we are here simply to brainstorm together. Many of you in the past discussed, wrote, talked with us about participation of organizations of persons with disabilities in many forums. So this is not a new conversation, but we want to really make it the most structured thus far and the most impactful thus far. And we have the biggest prize, and the biggest prize is that this paper will contribute to the GDS and also invite commitments. We have great speakers with us today. We have, first of all, from NORAD, from Norway, Matthias Egeland. Hello. Hello, Matthias.
Hello. Thank you.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Then we have a superstar, Priscilla Geiser. Hello, Priscilla. And we have one more superstar, Jose Vieira. So hello, Jose. Jose is representing GDS Secretariat.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Vladimir.
So with these three superstars and me a little bit being in their way, I hope that we will be able to deliver this webinar correctly, and that we will have enough time to have to set aside enough for our conversations. Before we move into the official part of the session, I will hand over to logistics of IDA. Emma please, can you just say a couple of words about housekeeping?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Emma Pham, and I will be the host and logistic focal point of this meeting. I am now going to briefly explain some of the features of today's call. This Zoom meeting is being recorded. There is international sign interpretation and cards in English. A CC button on your screen will enable the captions. If you need captions in a different window, the link is in the chat box. Should you have questions for the speakers, kindly use the chat box. We hope to have time for questions wherein participants may be invited to ask questions. Where time is an issue, priority will be given to live answering questions that are relevant to the meeting objectives. Should you have any accessibility issues, please send a private message to me or email ifam@idasecretary.org, also in the chat box, and we will try and resolve that to the best of our ability. We request all speakers to kindly keep to times, keep mics on mute while not speaking, and to ensure that you speak slow enough for the interpreters and the captioner to follow. Finally, we also request that all participants stay muted throughout the session as not to interrupt the speaker's presentation. Thank you, and please have a fruitful meeting.
Thank you very much, Emma. Whenever you start speaking at these webinars, I have to smile because it sounds exactly like before a flight when a person is telling like safety features of the plane. It sounds perfect. Thank you, Emma. Great. So let's move on. Let's hand over immediately to Norad, Matthias, to give a couple of words about why this is important, why we are doing this collectively, why Norway is first of all committed to participation of OPD, and how is that all going to fit into the GDS planning. Please.
Thank you, Vladimir, and thank you for having me. So OPD engagement, involvement, and capacity building is crucial to the realization of the CRPD. It is an important aspect of Norwegian development assistance work on disability inclusion. I'm not going to linger too long on this because I think most people in this webinar are well aware of the importance of OPD engagement. It was also a point in London at the GDS in 2018, and the GDS in Oslo in February 22, it will build on the commitments and the progress made from London. So what we hope to do with this discussion paper is to help shape the commitments. What kind of actions are we looking for, and what kind of actions would be most useful in making sure that the commitments that do come on development of capacity with OPDs and involvement and engagement of OPDs pull in the same direction and in a good direction. And we then hope that we will be able to draw on the experiences that all of our partners across the board have made in working with OPDs, engaging with OPDs, and assisting in the building of capacity with OPDs. So the challenge that we hope this paper will succeed in taking on with the help of all of you is to go one step further from simply making the commitment to OPD involvement and capacity building, but help answering how do we do this? Can we make the commitments a little bit more specific, a little bit more concrete, based on the experiences and the evidence that all of us have gathered and learned over the last few years? So this is the primary reason for this paper, to help shape and guide what kind of actions we would like to see from donors, from multilateral agencies, from civil society and NGOs and OPDs themselves. And I very much look forward to following the rest of this webinar. And with that, I'm going to hand over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Thank you very much. It is clear. I would also add a couple of words from Ida's side, and then we will go dive into the conversation about the discussion paper itself. As I mentioned, many of us discussed, and many of you discussed, and wrote and taught and implemented projects and on capacity building, on consultations, on participation, involvement of of organizations of persons with disabilities over the past. And we know that a lot has happened before COVID came, and we had some significant developments, specifically up to 2019. Agenda 2030, we had guidelines on inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action, a Security Council resolution. We have first Global Disability Summit with close to 1,000 commitments. So a lot of things really happened positively, but we measured in the first, we being IDA, measured with the first IDA global survey on OPD participation. In 2019, we measured how organizations are feeling about whether they are included or not by local governments, by development actors. And they said, yes, we are starting to be included, but not quite there, what we said, meaning that it is not smooth, preconditions don't exist yet. They are invited on certain topics that are most clearly about disability, and then there is no follow-up. There is no clear role for OPD, why they are there. So simply, we are starting to see positive trends in terms of inclusion in consultations, etc., but not quite. So we need to do more, and especially now since 2020, when we had COVID-19 crisis, and where we feel collectively that, and we know that a lot of terrible things happen with organizations of persons with disabilities, losing funding, losing standing, losing priority within stakeholders. We need to come back stronger. We need to come back double strong. So really, GDS 2022 in Oslo is instrumental moment that we need to seize and to really say, okay, we are back, and don't forget, and not just don't forget, but do more, because we learned from this, with this terrible, horrific pandemic, that first of all, it affected disabled people more, disproportionately more than non-disabled people, and also that we are interconnected. So we all need to be included. So it's really critical that we come back as a community with foundations, donors, UN, private sector, NGOs, everybody together, and to say in February 2022, we need to come back 2 times stronger than what we were doing before March last year. So that would be my kind of wish, and that can be maybe also kind of motivational force behind this paper. I don't want to bug you too much more, and I want to hand over immediately to Priscilla, who will be speaking more about proposed objectives outline and sources of evidence for the discussion paper. And here she will invite you all to do something very important, and I want to do it and steal her thunder a little bit, so sorry, Priscilla, for that. But we want to strongly invite you to complete IDA's second global survey and to invite your partners to do so. This is very critical, because we believe this is becoming instrument measure of how well we are collectively as world doing our job, simply as that. So I cannot stress enough how important this is. And I know you will say, yeah, yet another survey, please don't. I cannot do it anymore. We are constantly online and constantly completing surveys. It is way too much. But this one, I believe, is a little bit different, and it may deserve a couple of minutes of your time. Priscilla, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vladimir, and happy to be with all of you. Thanks for the almost 50 people connected to this webinar. That's really nice to see. I will ask my colleagues to display a couple of slides that I would like to use to guide this discussion. And as a start, let me just say that we come to you as an audience for this initial discussion very much with the spirit of getting ideas and testing very preliminary, a very preliminary outline for the discussion paper. This is the beginning of a conversation, and we would like to take this session as a way to exchange and enrich. So really, we have counted on sufficient time for a discussion to get your views on that. So if we can go to the next slide, I would like to start by discussing with you, I mean, this has been said already, the objectives for this discussion paper. So Matthias has highlighted the importance of the discussion paper as an instrument to frame the GDS itself. So what we hope is that this paper can provide background and evidence for OPD engagements, both in development and in humanitarian action. And the other second really big objective is to set strong ambition for the summit and generate bold commitments to boost meaningful engagement of OPDs in development and humanitarian action. I'm giving a couple of examples, but we would really welcome your ideas as well on what could be the vision and possible commitments on OPD engagement. For example, something leading to enhanced funding to support OPD's engagement in development. This is very much in line with some of the reflections that the GLAD network had in Washington a bit more than a year ago. Commitments to invest in capacity building programs that have proven effective in building a stronger and more cohesive disability rights movement, but also clear commitment from international cooperation partners to meaningfully engage with OPDs as partners and change their working practices. Just giving an example of accountability toolkits that are being developed by different organizations. From our discussion with NORAD, we also thought that without putting the onus on persons with disabilities and their representative organizations, it could be also interesting to have some commitments related to OPDs themselves to strive to represent the diversity of persons with disabilities. So we look forward to the discussion part to also have your thoughts on the type of commitments that the paper could stimulate and generate. Of course, we want OPD engagement commitments, but this is also one other way this paper could be used is to provide some general principles that could be applied to other commitments, say on humanitarian action, livelihoods, etc., that could be underpinned by clear expression of how the pledging organizations want to involve OPDs in their work. So going to the next slide, I would like to just say a few words about the scope of the paper. So why is IDA leading on this discussion paper? Obviously linked to our mandate and our representative role, but we really wanted to ensure that on OPD engagement, we provide an OPD-led perspective on what works to ensure OPD engagement, also combined with inputs from all of you as partners and allies. And that's why we don't want to take this paper on our own, but we want to ensure that this is informed by broad consultation and participation. The paper itself would cover OPD engagement, but also the preconditions for meaningful participation. Some of the ideas exchanged with NORAD so far revolved around capacity building, effective investment of donors in OPDs. And again, I think this paper could lead to an opportunity for the GLAD network to continue the conversations that were started in Washington a while ago. For this paper also, we will rely on existing evidence. Unfortunately, the time is quite tight, so we won't have much of an opportunity to start new research, but we believe there's a wealth of evidence, good practices, data that is there and that we can rely from, and we would also look forward to hearing from you on what you know exists. I will come to what we have identified in just a moment. What we would try to do also is not to claim to be exhaustive. OPD engagement with governments, with international partners in development, humanitarian, all sectors, that's enormous. But what we would like to capture is significant evidence and covering a range of diverse examples. So more something that is strong enough to incentivize good pledges than something that claims to be the alpha and omega on the topic. So another point is that obviously also linked to time constraints, we will not be able to have external evaluations to review the potential good practices submitted, but rather Jose will speak to the process that we have envisaged to validate and review collectively that what we propose is indeed good enough. So going to the next slide, please. Here I would like to touch upon the provisional outline and the couple of sources of evidence that we have thought about for this paper. So first of all, and again, before I start, this is very much for your ideas and thoughts and reflections. So first of all, the first part we thought would be important to recall is the why and what of OPD engagement. So referring to the CRPD and General Comment 7, what is the legal and policy framework calling for OPD participation, unpacking a little bit what it means, what it covers on all issues at all stages of program or policy making, representing the diversity of persons with disabilities, unpacking also a little bit the different roles that OPDs can have, diverse ways of engaging. And also perhaps in that section, setting the initial parameters of what meaningful participation means. Vladimir was referring to our first global survey on OPD participation, and indeed the clear message that came out of that survey was that yes, we are seeing progress, but this is not strong enough, and our perspectives are shared, but they are not well taken into account at this stage. The second part would be more around what is the current situation, stock taking exercise. And this is where we would like to prominently feature the perceptions of OPDs themselves about their participation in decision making. So with governments, with international cooperation stakeholders, including the UN, and also considering the impact of COVID-19 on OPDs. And for this, we would like to rely on the second IDA Global Survey on OPD participation. There are also a couple of studies and surveys, including a knowledge product that is being developed with FCDO on looking at the impact of COVID on OPDs. We have, when it comes to examples from the other side of the picture, so not OPD's perception, but other stakeholders, we know there's progress from the side of the UN with the reports produced on the UN disability inclusion strategies. So we thought it could be interesting to have an example of self-assessment by the UN system itself of their engagement with OPDs, which is now possible through Indicator 5 of the UNDIS. We also thought it could be really interesting to have a focus on underrepresented groups of persons with disabilities and give visibility and show that it's possible and desirable to engage with groups that are usually not well enough represented. So moving to the next slide for the other part of the report. From our discussion, again, internally and with NORAD, one of the ideas that we thought would be very important to have a compelling paper is to showcase good practices and evidence from experience. So some of the subsections here that we have pre-identified would be to have a focus on the preconditions. What works in terms of OPD capacity building? And I think there's a wealth of experience and expertise on that. What works also in terms of smart investment in organizations of persons with disabilities. By that, what we mean is what works to ensure that progressively OPDs can become more equal partners on the development scene through flexible funding mechanisms, through proportionate due diligence requirements, and so on and so forth. Other aspects that we think is essential to cover is inclusive programming. So at all stages of a project or program development, implementation, evaluation, governance, etc. How do we support OPD engagement, and what are good examples in that? And the same for the policymaking cycle, with probably more examples of collaboration with governments. So possible sources of evidence for this would actually, what we thought, and Jose will speak more about it, so I won't be very long, but we would like to have an open call for good practices, to invite every possible organization to suggest what has proven successful, and to have a review group to examine those good practices. We believe there are also a wealth of learning papers, existing guidance and reports from IDDC, from GLAD members, from different consortium projects that have taken a clear step in associating OPDs in the governance or in the whole implementation of the programs, including in the UN system with the PRPD, for example. And finally, to come to the end of the structure of the paper, what we propose is that the final section is dedicated to recommendations on how pledging organizations can generate strong commitments to improve OPD engagement. So really drawing from the parts before to guide very concretely how the commitments can be made, as Matthias said, to be more concrete, to go one step further, to be more ambitious on OPD engagement. I think COVID has unfortunately shown that many of the policies that were not planned with the perspective of persons with disabilities are were not efficient in including and responding to our priorities. And so if we don't want to revert back to what was done before, this investment is really much needed. Going to the next slide, please. So I just want to take a step aside and make a bit of a focus. Vladimir already spoke about it, but we really want to stress the importance of the second IDA global survey on OPD participation, because this would be one of the sources of quantitative evidence for capturing the point that I presented about OPD's perceptions of their participation. So what is this survey? At IDA level, we want it to become a regular monitoring tool to capture the perceptions of OPDs themselves. And the survey actually covers participation of OPDs with governments, with the UN, and with funding agencies. It has no particular focus on any sector. This is really a global and wide scope way of taking the pulse of what the disability rights movement think of their participation. Just to take a look at the first global survey, the findings that we produced through this first exercise is something that we have used to produce recommendations towards the UN system. We have used those recommendations, for example, very recently with the UNDIS team to comment and enrich the OPD engagement guidelines that are being developed. And also at the national level, the findings have been used, for example, by national advocates to provide evidence to their governments that participation of OPDs is largely insufficient. What we hope to do with the second global survey is to, of course, keep building and ensure that we can have comparable data to track progress over time. But we wanted to go a little bit further by resolving first the difficulties we faced by the lack of accessible online survey interface. So for this one, we have developed an accessible survey platform, which has been tested and co-developed with persons with disabilities. We won't have any limitation in the number of responses per OPD, unlike the first survey. So we really hope to attract a very large number of activists' responses. We reviewed and we simplified the questionnaire, and we also consulted with NORAD, with UNDIS to have questions that directly inform different processes, including the Global Disability Summit, to capture the priorities of persons with disabilities. So if we go to the next slide, I will share with you the link to the survey. We would like to very much call on your support to disseminate it. It exists in 7 languages, including International Sign, and my colleagues will also post the link directly in the chat box, so you can use and disseminate the survey, and we can also follow up, of course, after this call. So I think that comes to the end of my introduction. Sorry that it was a little bit long, but I think it's really important that we provide you the framework, and we really would like to have now your reactions and suggestions on it. So I will hand back now to Vladimir, and perhaps we cover a little bit about the process as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Priscille, for the great introduction into the discussion paper. I will hand over to Jose in a minute, but there was just a question about from Harriet, whether we will be excluding external evaluations, and Matthias responded very well to say that actually we are not excluding results of external evaluations implemented thus far, but we don't plan to implement new external evaluations with this process. So just that, and we are already starting to speak about processes. So thank you, Matthias, for helping. Jose, now we are back to you and talking about processes, please.
Thank you, Vladimir. I just want to check that, Aaron, we are displaying the slide number 8. And I'm sure that many of you are asking, so how are we going to do this? What Priscille and Vladimir presented, as well as Matthias, is just an amazing opportunity to contribute to to this process. But I'm sure many of you are already pulling out your work plan and see how we can fit this invitation. And that's exactly what we have asked over the last few weeks in IDA, in the GDS Secretariat, and together with NORAD. And I just want to present a process that we thought it could serve the purpose of the paper, and of course ensuring that we are meeting those standards and principles around meaningful engagement and participatory process. So as you can see, the idea of this process is actually to have a validation and editorial role played by NORAD and IDA as co-host of the Global Disability Summit, but at the same time, the 2 agencies that are leading the specific work around the discussion paper. But besides the validation and editorial role that we have thought it makes sense to assign to NORAD and IDA, we really wanted to add at least some other roles in this process. And one is who's going to lead the process, who's going to be leading the whole elaboration of the paper. And since this is an OPD engagement discussion paper, and the main focus of the paper would be how to ensure that OPDs are meaningfully engaged in the whole process, it did naturally make sense that the process is led by IDA in the elaboration of the paper. However, we know that by leading the elaboration of the paper, it's just more a combination of logistic and technical work, but at the same time, we always need the consultation component in any process. And so we thought that along with IDA leading the elaboration of the process, we really want to have stakeholders involved and supporting through giving advice to the elaboration of the process. And that's where it comes, this idea of consultation. And finally, the 4th sort of pillar that will support the whole process is actually having stakeholders, partners that are, many of them are even on this call, and we are thankful for that, to support the elaboration of the process. Priscilla clearly mentioned several times the need of evidence-based process and how we can bring through the global survey, the IDA global survey, more evidence to document what we are trying to put together through this paper. And that's the fourth pillar, how we can support the whole process. Well, how we are gonna make this mechanism works, we like to propose at least two specific groups that can allocate some time to support the elaboration of the process. The first group that namely G5, is a group made of 5 members that will try to provide advisory support to the elaboration of the process. We really want to ensure that what we produce is in line with what active stakeholders have to say or can contribute with. So we really hope that this G5 can propose recommendations in terms of a advisory role to the elaboration of the paper. But as long as we move along in the production of this discussion paper, we have understood how critically important is to have good practices, case studies that can document what we are saying and that can transform the paper in an evidence-based report. And that's why we are proposing in this process to create another group, a smaller one, made up of 3 members that can help us in collecting, reviewing, and suggesting the incorporation of some good practices and case studies to the discussion paper. So if we look at this from a holistic point of view, we have IDA and the GDS Secretariat, IDA leading in the elaboration of the content for the paper, the GDS Secretariat leading more at the coordination level, NORAD and IDA playing the editorial and validation process, and then the G5 and the G3, the G5 as an advisory role, and G3 as a way of bringing all those good practices that I'm sure there are a lot out there. In terms of way forward, the paper will be produced by IDA. The paper will be validated by the 14th IDA members because that will legitimize the voice of OPDs present in the document, but particularly the G5, the group of advisory role, the group that is playing the advisory role, will help us in delivering what we want in terms of the paper. If we can move to the next slide. As I said before, how we're going to achieve all this in such short time is a challenge, but it's in a way also an exciting opportunity for all of us. So as you can see, today we are launching the first webinar. And in addition to that, we hope to establish these 2 groups, the advisory group and the good practice group also, so we can start doing the work. We do have next 2 weeks quite intense in terms of preparing the term of reference for the elaboration of the paper, the call out for good practices, etc., etc. And after July 15 until the first week of September, we would be working more or less in the first draft and of the paper and compiling all that information. In September and October, we will be concentrating in collecting the evidence that hopefully the second IDA global survey will bring. And that is again why it's critical that we promote and we get as much as information as we can through the global survey, so we have enough evidence to support the paper. And so September and October, we will be working on compiling all this information, including the case studies and good practices. And towards the end of October and November, we will be doing the validation process with the advisory group established hopefully today, and by IDA 14 members, so we can reach December 3rd as the date to publish the paper. Of course, previous validation of the two co-hosts of the Global Disability Summit. Time is short, opportunity is really exciting, and of course, I'm happy to respond to any question. Over to you, Vladimir. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jose. So thank you for your presentation. We have a first question from DRF that says, who does G3 and G5 refer to? Will this advisory committee be formed, or has it already been formed? Jose, please.
Right. So both these two groups, the advisory and the group that will be responsible for collecting good practices, we hope that can be formed today. We really want to have, especially for the advisory group, good balance between the different voices from the different stakeholders present in this webinar. But the idea that in this large group that is attending the webinar today, we can have the members of the G5, the advisory group, as well as the members for the group who's going to look into the case studies and good practices.
So we are looking for members for both. So we are looking for volunteers, pretty much.
That is correct, Vladimir.
Thank you, Jose. So if you have any other comments or questions, now it's a time. Thank you, Priscilla and Jose, for presenting about the discussion paper and about second OPD survey. So let's look now at the questions or comments. If you want to speak, you can raise your hand, or you can type into the chat box your questions or comments, or if you want to volunteer for this work. Everything is highly welcomed. We have quite a lot of time. We dedicated a lot of time to these conversations. So please, if you have comments or questions. Just to clarify, you don't have to volunteer here. You can volunteer later on via email if you want to consider, if you want to think things through, etc. So it's not mandatory that people who are now on the call will formulate the G3 and G5. But please, if you want, it is also possible. One of the things, for example, that we discussed is how it will be very complicated to actually think through about these good or best practices, and how how important it will be to define really what is a good practice and what do we mean by good practice. So it will be quite a decent work that needs to go into this direction. It's not just that you will read and say, okay, this is good, this is bad, but rather we have to think collectively about what do we mean by a good practice, and what we would welcome and what we would not welcome. So, okay, FCDO is welcoming and supportive this, but will come back to us about whether they will volunteer for any of the position. And Nathan said, roughly how much of time commitment are you expecting the roles to require? Good question. Hard to say. Hard to say. Those are not nice questions, Nathan. I don't know. I really don't know how much time, Jose.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would say that for the advisory group, what we are expecting is at least one revision of the paper. How much time that means, it's hard to say, but at least one revision of the paper, and some important feedback to the paper. It's not just that we would like to run through the advisory group. We want the paper to be read by the advisory group, but propose inputs to the paper. That would ensure us to have a representative paper. When it comes to the group, the smaller group that will look into good practices, Again, IDA leading the process and the Global Disability Summit coordinating the work. We will be doing the exercise of getting case studies and good practices, but we will definitely require that group to look into those good practices. So it's really hard to determine an amount of time now, but hopefully we will have a significant number of case studies, but that will imply more work of this G3. Just one clarification point there, especially when it comes to the case studies and good practices. The volume of the good practices and case studies that we want to have and incorporate to the paper will depend very much on the great contributions that everybody on this call can make in collecting and sending in good practices. So perhaps if you feel that you cannot commit time to be part of the advisory group or for the other group, maybe your role here, which is equally important, is to help us in identifying good practices and some case studies that can support the document.
Thank you, Jose. We have a volunteer in DPOD. Thank you, Mette. She said, thank you for inviting everyone for this meeting. It sounds very relevant and great to pull a paper like this together. DPOD will be happy to contribute. That is great. Before I hand over to Marie, I just want to read a couple of more questions from the chat. First, Facundo, I think, raised a very good question. That is, in that question already is a hint of something very critical. He said, will you be developing principles for good practices to guide good practice identification? So it's not, he did not use the words checklist or anything like that, but he said guiding principles. And I think this is important, that we need to collectively develop within this G5 and G3 guiding principles. So we need to know how we are defining what are the good practices. Because, you know, if we receive from somebody, from a friendly organization, their good practice, and we just publish it like that, then, you know, then it has to go through certain level of scrutiny or through certain level of review, and we need to be meaningful in this review. And I believe that these principles can be the result by itself. So process will be the result in itself. So Jose, do you want to talk more on this Facundo's question, or you, Priscilla? Jose, go ahead.
Priscilla. Yeah, no, very, very quick. In addition to what you said, Vladimir, actually the paper as such aims at creating some recommendations that can even hopefully be used as guiding principles for meaningful engagement. So it makes sense that even from the process, we start building upon those guiding principles that hopefully will be reflected in the paper, and we expect to be one of the main outcomes of the paper. That's how I would see the whole mechanism working ahead of us.
Thank you, Jose. And just to add from my side, I think that will be a task, one of the first tasks of the G3, this group of three, to agree, probably through a dialogue with the group working on advising the document itself, on the initial parameters. Then a second task will be and to formulate the call for case studies, good practices. Then once those will be collected, to screen through those practices and use the principles previously agreed. And I think this may indeed lead to some recommendations in the last part of the report in terms of parameters we want to recommend for the pledges themselves. So I think that's, yeah, quite a big task ahead of this group.
Thank you, Priscilla. DRF says also that they would like to be involved, but they will get back to us. Thompson ADD would like to be involved as well. Looking forward to working with all of us. Finally, EDF, Marion says the same, but she would like to know more about time commitment. While I'm giving floor to Marie, Priscilla and Jose, please think more about how much would be in terms of time commitment. I have to admit, we were so inspired to start working on this that we didn't put on a paper number of hours that would take from G5 and G3 members. Priscilla, you are very capable to letting this through. So if you can start thinking while I give floor to Marie. Marie, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry I should have written, but I'll just speak. I'm from Lenichesha, and we're working in the Inclusive Futures Consortium, which has a major leg on OPD engagement. I only wanted to say that I hear that Priscilla is saying that Inclusive Futures would be one of the case learning pieces that that we could contribute. But the Inclusive Futures project, which is across multiple low-income countries, really is just in its beginning stages. It's only in the first year, so the case studies will still be inconclusive. It could only, we could probably all get together and demonstrate how we integrate it into the planning, starting with the project, but we will not be able to track the progress that will only come in 1 or 2 years' time. So I'm just saying, I think September is quite soon for some of the case studies that we're expecting.
Marie, I was catching your voice here and there. I know that you were referencing inclusive features, but I did not hear everything what you said. I don't know if you can type in your question, please.
No, I'm sorry. Is this better?
Oh,
I'm
much
sorry.
better.
Can
Oh
you hear
my
me
goodness.
better now?
Much better. Goodness. Okay, please.
Sorry.
Go ahead. If you can repeat quickly what you said, just summarize.
Okay, I'll type. I can't hear you now.
Marie?
Yes, I just wanted to say the Inclusive Futures cannot give a conclusive case study so early as September. It could only provide first steps taken on OPD engagement. So I think many of the case studies that you would want to include in your report by January will still be very provisional. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can very well. Thank you. So yes. So you're saying that the timeline of your project is not fully in line with what we are proposing, right?
Yes, I'm just saying it can make a major contribution because it's a really huge, 10% of that budget is being devoted to OPD engagement, and it's being overseen by IDA and so on. So one can already start showing what initial steps have been taken, but it cannot be conclusive best practice from that project.
Gotcha, Marie. Thank you. We will take what we can get at this stage, and of course, we are pressed for time because of GDS. So GDS is a deadline, definite deadline, and we need to influence also commitments. So there is we need certain room for maneuver before GDS so that we can influence and motivate commitments from stakeholders in this direction. So it's highly important that we have enough time for this. But let's talk about this. Let's see in September what you have, and let's see if it is something or what we have collectively, and see what we can bring over. Gopal, please, UNDIS.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vladimir, for convening all of us. It is really great, and it is an initiative which will really be super useful. And we wanted to say that please count on our support from the UNDIS team. And I would like to say, and thank you for including the UNDIS data that we are gathering on the in the paper. So would just like to say that all of you, and you'll be pleased to hear that all 130 UN country teams have completed the UNDIS UNCT scorecard, including on the indicator on consulting organizations of persons with disabilities. So we'll have a solid baseline. The data will be available in September or the beginning of October. We'll be happy to share that with you. It will also go into the SG report. And along with that, we'll have a solid second year data for entities on all indicators, including in this context, on consulting organizations of persons with disabilities. And please count on our engagement, and thank you for including us. And just one point, yesterday we had a call with 10 UN country teams which are implementing the UNCT scorecard, UNDIS UNCT scorecard, and early piloting or early rollout. And all 10 countries presented, and the one common a point that was across all the countries is consulting organizations of persons with disabilities, which everyone highlighted as a priority, and they've taken action. But what we realize is there is a lot of good intent, but there is a gap between the intent and the capacity to make it meaningful, you know. And if some ways through the commitments, we need much more investment on organizations of persons with disabilities, and also investment from the UN from within to engage and consult. And I think these will be so vital to reflect it in the paper so the commitments can flow accordingly. And yes, please count on our engagement. We'll be more than happy to engage and do whatever is required. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopal. Thank you, Gopal and Georgia and the whole team at UNDIS. Thank you for your support. We definitely count on you, and it's great news that you are bringing today about priorities to engage OPDs within 130 UN country teams. Thank you, Gopal, for your work, really. We are definitely counting on you. I think that I saw previously hand of Juan Angel from Riyadh. He wanted to take the floor, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Juan, do you want a floor? In the meantime, while this is happening, Elena Cheshire would be happy to contribute to process and case study. Facundo Chavez.
And Vladimir, we are receiving some emails, so you can always reach out to us by email and confirming your availability. So thanks for those who have already written to us as we were speaking, and you can do so.
I didn't check emails. This will require multiple level of like media attention, maybe not for a man to begin with. I don't believe that I have that kind of capacity. Juan, did you want to speak? No. Okay, we can move on. Facundo says that if criteria is defined, UNDIS will be best source to identify practices for UN side. Thank you, Facundo. Do we have any other questions or comments, or somebody that would like to speak maybe?
Vladimir,
okay,
in the meantime, yes, just to try and elaborate a little bit on the time that would be requested. This is indeed a tough question because this process is new, and perhaps I think we have done from IDDC. I know you have also gone through a process of identifying good practices for a recent report on COVID-19 disability inclusive responses. So if you have some tips and learning from that, that would be great if you can share. But roughly speaking, what we have anticipated in terms of the advisory group is that probably what we will need is one or two initial call to really agree on the outline based on the draft that I presented today, and also to formulate, and that's probably where the two groups would meet, the call for case studies, really anticipating what is it that we want to receive as information. And then in terms of the review of the document itself, what we thought would be important is to split the work in two rounds, if I can say like this. First round would cover the framing part and the stock taking, because I think we can have already some evidence from existing sources by September. And thanks, Gopal, for adding this information. I think we would be able to produce a draft of part 1 and 2, so the framing and stock taking, for review in September. Then part 3 on the good practices, and then part 4 on formulation of recommendations for the pledges This depends on the review and analysis of the case studies. So that will come as a second part, and then probably, I mean, not probably, for sure, a final review. So that means at least 1, 2, 3, 4 steps for engagement. For the G3, that is looking at setting principles, also formulating the call for case studies, reviewing these against the principles, and then discussing the validation. These are the steps that we can foresee. Of course, one big unknown is the number of case studies that we will receive. So that means the volume of work will also depend on that. And perhaps one thing we could consider, also seeing that there's great interest from many organizations, is to probably broaden a little bit that group of 3 in case we have lots of case studies. I mean, we haven't discussed that, but that's something we could consider, perhaps, to have more support to review if the volume of submissions is too big. So Dom, would you like, I see you have added a comment in the chat box. Do you want to share your experience of the process you went through for identifying and selecting good practices?
Oh, not sure I'm fully prepped to do that, Priscilla, but I mean, fundamentally, just to make sure that what we did in IDDC was complementary to the work that IDA and others are doing. What we focused on in our survey was the experience of IDDC members and how that functioned in relationship to partnerships with OPDs, of course, some IDDC members being OPDs themselves. So it's a slightly different kind of approach to IDAs, which focus very much on OPDs, but also persons with disabilities individually, and also to the DRM. But nonetheless, I think there are some really helpful findings from that. So I hope that's helpful. And yeah, as I said, I've kind of volunteered by email to Jose for IDDC to be involved, and we can just have a chat and work out who the best connections would be. I think it would be really important for the OPD task group of IDDC to be involved in particular. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dom, and thank you very much, IDC. I think, like what Priscilla said, indeed, if we have many good practices, after we developed these principles, I think that after that, indeed, we can think about broadening this G3 or have a couple of G3s, let's say, that can review batches of these good practices. And then we produce a set of like recommendation and set of good, final kind of finalists, let's say, that can go into the document. I think that we can think about this definitely, Priscilla, and thank you for thinking through the timeline. Just to say that CEDA is also supportive of this work, and GIZ is happy to share some of their practices. They did a small survey with CBM International, I believe, asking DPOs about their level of involvement. So that would be great. Like I said at the beginning of this meeting, I'm sure that many of us did a lot of writing and thinking and work and surveying people. So I'm sure that a lot has been done. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel every time, but rather to recognize the work of all of you. Ruby Holmes said IDDC OPD task group is ready and happy to be involved. It is in proud response to Dom's volunteering somebody else. Thank you, Dom. Thank you, Dom, for doing that. Anyways, Juan, do you want to speak now? I see your hand raised now. I believe that you will need to come with the camera. Okay, we still have some difficulties with, there you go. Yes, we can see you.
Okay, can the interpreters see me? That's great. I've been observing the topics. And what I'm thinking is that we need the DPOs, a lot of them, to actually be involved. And you're hoping to have this completed by September. So what I see is, you know, you need good liaison with the government. You also need, it's also volunteering your time and having to do some outreach to, you know, globally. So it's to deaf people, to people who are blind, deaf-blind, physical disability. So, you know, it's almost like 2 years of that hard work to actually get it to that level. So I think we need to do a lot of outreach work to make this a success. So I think, you know, hopefully it will be a success.
Thank you very much, Juan. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we are counting on your help as well. Dom is too late apologizing to Ruby. Okay, we can move on. Like from Atlas Alliance says that they are also collecting some good practices, and she will be happy to contribute time to this task. That is great. Thank you very much, Atlas Alliance. Do we have any other comments or raise hands? Okay, I don't see anything else. Jose, do you want to say something generally that we are maybe forgetting or?
No, not really. I think we covered most of the things that we want to share. I just want to highlight that it's amazing to see that we have a lot of people with already good practices that are willing to share, and this is exactly what we need. We really want this paper to be an evidence-based paper, but also just to say that the paper, this discussion paper that we are collectively putting together, is one of the biggest contributions that we can make to the GDS 2022, as the paper will be also used to generate commitments. So I know that in this call there are some stakeholders that may be already starting to think on commitments. So let's think strategically on how we can connect all the dots. And also the paper will serve the purpose of defining themes for the next GDS 2022. So the more collectively we can work towards this paper, the better position we will be in terms of themes, commitments for the next GDS 2022.
Thank you very much, Jose. I would say also just a couple of words before I hand over to Priscilla. I think that what we heard also is that there is we need to invite you to share if you did some job of similar nature. So if you did some survey of similar nature, share with us, like what GIZ mentioned, for example. I think that there are a few of those. So I think that that can be one invitation that is outside of volunteering for anything. Then second invitation is to think about good practices and to start collecting and sharing with us good practices. Third is indeed to volunteer for one of these groups and to start thinking with us about next steps and how we can formulate and implement this important paper. Fourth is to complete and to invite your members and partners to complete the second global OPD survey. I think this is very, very critical, and because it will feed into this paper and it will be instrumental building block. And not just for this purpose. This is, like I said at the beginning, we are hoping and we are seeing already that this is becoming more as a measuring tool, not just for IDA, but for many else. There's one more question. If this paper will help decide themes of GDS, will the themes not be decided too late? What is the timeline on this? A good question, Jose.
I can address that. Thank you, Vladimir. So themes for the GDS 2022 are coming from different sources. National consultations, and many people on this call have been involved, that were conducted by IDA, discussions through the different structure of the GDS. So this paper is one of the many sources that we will have to agree on themes. The idea of going through this process collectively is actually the tool that we need to generate themes for the GDS.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you. Priscilla, do you want to say a couple of words?
Yeah, thank you. It's just to stress the commitments and the focus that Norway is making on OPD engagement, and I think that this is reflected, as Jose just referred to, the GDS national consultation throughout the process that is leading to the summit itself. And of course, this was already an important component of the GDS in 2018 in London, but to in a way compensate for the fact that the summit will be held online. I think we are thinking of many different ways to put OPD engagement even more at the center. So the GDS national consultations that have started already at the end of last year are a way to create that enthusiasm, that an interest, and to prepare the ground for later on a follow-up by civil society of the commitments that will be made. The global survey is another way to identify priorities, and this discussion paper, being one of the central pieces, is really also a testimonial to the intention that Norway puts behind the summit itself. I think so much is often done in the name of inclusive development without this meaningful engagement. And I think we have an opportunity to define what that means at different levels and based on the experience and on facts. So I just wanted to stress that, to flag the importance of this paper, and really invite, if some of you cannot contribute to the groups, and we also do want to keep the groups of a manageable size, there's ample room to contribute from your experience and good practices and share sources of evidence that obviously we cannot think of everything ourselves. So really welcoming very diverse contribution, because that, I think, will give strength to the paper.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you, everybody. So I don't see any other questions or comments. Last chance. So we have a couple of ways in which we are hoping to receive your support and your contribution and your volunteering to different streams of this work. I think that we did a decent job in presenting these opportunities. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for coming. Thank you for raising questions. And I would like to slowly close this meeting by thanking Priscilla, Jose, Matthias, and also sign language interpreters and closed captioning, and in the first place, all of you that came and raised questions. Matthias, do you want to say last words before we close the meeting?
Well, thank you. Very, very informative and a good session. Great to see all the interest and avenues of contributions. Looking forward to this process continuing and seeing the outputs. When it comes to the themes for the Global Disability Summit, one thing that's very safe to say now is that OPD engagement and involvement will matter across any theme that is identified for focus at the summit, whether it's education or social protection. OPD engagement will be key. So we are confident that the inputs from this paper will be significant and serve an important role in shaping the commitments. And thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you, Matthias, for giving the last words. And also Priscilla just said that we will be sharing PowerPoint with everybody. Once again, thank you everybody for joining. I hope that you will have a nice rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.